We live in a world that's just obsessed with finding the right answer. But what if the most important skill we could teach is how to ask the right question? Today, we're going to unpack the power of inquiry models.
Look, we train students to be amazing at taking tests, right? But life, well, it doesn't just hand you a multiple choice sheet. The real world, it needs investigators. It needs people who can handle ambiguity and actually figure out their own solutions.
So that really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? How do we build learners who don't just sit around waiting for answers, but who are out there actively hunting for problems? Well, the solution is a big shift in mindset, and it all starts with a few really powerful instructional strategies. All right, here's our game plan for today. First, we're going to dig into the why behind inquiry. Then, we'll open up the toolkit and break down 3 super powerful models: the Suchman, the WebQuest, and problem-based learning, or PBL. We'll even talk about how you assess this kind of learning, and then wrap it all up by showing you why this shift isn't just some new trend, it is a total game changer for education. Okay, let's get one thing straight right from the start. This is not about just adding a new activity to your lesson plan. No, this is about fundamentally rewiring the entire learning process. So, at its heart, inquiry-based learning completely flips the traditional classroom on its head. It literally plunges students into what the source material calls a wilderness of mystery. I love that phrase. And in this world, the teacher isn't a lecturer. They're more like a guide, a consultant. The engine that drives everything? It's not the teacher's answers. It's the student's own questions. Okay, so that's the theory. But how does this actually work in practice? Well, our first tool in the toolkit is the Suchman inquiry model. And this one is all about teaching the actual process of scientific thinking. So the guy behind this, Richard Suchman, he believed that literally anyone can learn to think like a scientist. And his model starts with something puzzling. A situation that just makes you stop and go, that's weird. From there, it gives you a really structured way to investigate that puzzle, training students to use disciplined inquiry instead of just, throwing out wild guesses. Here's the breakdown of how it works. The teacher presents what's called a discrepant event. Then, and this is the really cool part, students can only gather data by asking questions that can be answered with a simple yes or no. This forces them to be incredibly precise with their thinking. From that data, they build a hypothesis, they explain it, and then, and this is so important, they actually analyze their own questioning process to figure out how they could have been more efficient. It's brilliant.
All right, our next tool takes that same spirit of inquiry and plugs it straight into the digital world. Let's take a look at the WebQuest model. So a WebQuest isn't just telling students, hey, go Google it. Not at all. It's way more structured. The teacher actually acts as a curator, carefully selecting a set of online resources. Then, they give students a complex, open-ended problem to solve using only those materials. It's inquiry with guardrails. The structure is actually pretty elegant. You've got the teacher acting like an architect, designing the whole challenge and curating all the resources. But then, they hand over the keys. The students are the ones in the driver's seat, empowered to navigate the information, synthesize it, and really just own the entire problem-solving process from beginning to end. Okay, our third tool, the problem-based inquiry model, or PBL, takes things even a step further. It's not just about solving a hypothetical problem anymore. This is about taking real, tangible action in the world. Now, this model is super powerful because it's built on a tried-and-true framework, the 5E learning cycle. It guides students through a really clear process, from getting engaged with a problem all the way to evaluating their work. And they use simple tools like an inquiry chart to organize their thinking along the way. But the real goal here, it isn't just an answer, it's action. So think of it like a journey, right? First, you engage students with a problem that actually matters to them. Then, they get to explore it, kind of mapping out their investigation. Next, they explain what they've found, not just to the teacher, but to each other. Now here's the critical leap. They elaborate by designing a real-world action plan. And finally, they evaluate their own impact, which closes the loop on their learning. It's a full circle. This table does a fantastic job of summing it all up. Just look at how the teacher's role changes. In the Suchman model, the teacher is a strict data source, only giving yes or no answers. In a WebQuest, they become a resource curator and a tech advisor. And finally, with PBL, they're a facilitator and feedback provider. See that? The teacher's control gradually fades as the student's autonomy and connection to the real world ramps up. That's the progression we're talking about. Okay, this all sounds amazing in theory, right? But there's always a big question that comes up.
How in the world do you grade this? And how do you make sure it's working for every single student in the room?
Well, the most important thing to remember is this. You just can't measure a 21st century skill with a 20th century test. It doesn't work. The whole focus of assessment has to shift, away from the correctness of the final answer and over to the quality of the student's inquiry. This means we have to move beyond bubble sheets and start using things like performance tasks, direct observation, and evaluating both the group's process and each individual's unique contribution.
And you know, the real beauty of inquiry is that it's almost naturally differentiated. Think about it. You can tailor the content by letting students chase down questions that genuinely spark their interest. You can vary the process. Maybe some students are out there interviewing experts while others are digging through archives. And you can offer choices for the final product, letting them show what they've learned in a way that really plays to their strengths, whether that's writing, speaking, or building something digital. So, after all this, you might be thinking, why go through all the trouble? Why shift from a comfortable, predictable, answer-driven classroom to one that's, let's be honest, a little bit messy and question-driven? What's the actual payoff here?
Oh, the payoff is huge. It's absolutely immense. Inquiry puts ownership of learning right back into the student's hands. It builds metacognition. In other words, it teaches them how to learn, not just what to learn. It develops real collaboration skills and pushes thinking way beyond simple memorization. Let's put it simply, inquiry prepares students for the challenges of life, not just for the questions on the next test.
So, we'll leave you with this question to ponder. Inquiry learning is all about inviting students to join in on the great adventure of discovery. So, what problem, what puzzle, what wilderness of mystery is out there just waiting for your students to explore? And hey, if you want to dive deeper into any of this, a full list of the sources we use to build this explainer is waiting for you in the description.